Anna, and it's great to have you here in conversation with us this Friday morning.
Thank you, Kerry.
It's great to see you again, because Anna, let me see, when was it we were together last? I guess it's around, oh dear, it's about 17 years ago. I don't want to remember that too much in terms of the passing of time. But at that time you were working in at the Poppy Project, isn't that right?
Yes, that's right.
Would you like to just talk us briefly about what Poppy was about? Because that was an interesting response to it's a pioneering response, really, to the emergence of the first women who were trafficked into the UK, or the awareness of it.
Absolutely.
About it.
And of course, none of us have aged a day, have we, Carrie? No, we look absolutely the same 17 years later.
Not a crease, not a crow foot anywhere to be seen.
No, exactly. Well, the Poppy Project was set up in response, like you said, to that when both government and civil society, I think, first became aware of young women and girls being trafficked into the UK for sexual exploitation. And in terms of, I mean, I think the government's agenda was very much in terms of law enforcement. How do you prevent this, or how do you hold people responsible? Whereas I think civil society's response was very much, in fact, a victim recognition, identification, and protection. So the Poppy Project was very much about providing supported shelter or supported housing for those women and those girls, both in terms of feeling safe and in terms of kind of planning for the future afterwards. So
what got you involved in that in the first place, Anna? Because you're not from the UK originally. You're a Swedish citizen. So
yes.
How did that happen?
Well, I've been going backwards. Had a love affair with the UK for a long time. I first came over as a 19-year-old and then met my partner to be. And so this time around, it was his turn to go to study. So he was training to become a teacher, and I was then looking for work, and then found the Poppy Project, which suited me well with my experience and background. So that's how that came around.
Okay, so that you were there for several years, and then moved back to Sweden.
Yes.
And then what happened then?
Well, I think this is around 2008 when we decided to move back to Sweden, and I subsequently started working at an organisation, an NGO called Stockholm City Mission, which is quite a broad sort of anti or counter social exclusion organisation, which works with people in homelessness, people sleeping rough, but also elderly people, issues to do with poverty, children and families in poverty, unaccompanied minors. So quite a broad sort of range of services, but all to do with sort of providing service and also speaking up about the experiences and the things that we were seeing on the streets and in our various services, and what the government or various agencies could be doing to improve the situation. So a combination of a service provider and a sort of campaigning organisation, if you want.
And as a city mission, I guess it was a sort of Lutheran foundation in the first place. Is that right?
Yes, yeah.
Did it have a special sort of angle into the churches to try and activate them into social awareness and presencing?
I mean, it certainly had common roots. I think City Mission, by this stage, I mean, when it was founded in 1865 or whatever, it very much had a common kind of common thread with the church. But 160 odd years later, it's independent from the church. But of course, lots of people with that values, Christian values or Christian ethos, would get involved in terms of both supporting financially and volunteering and so. But
a little bit like Children's Society here, or Save the Children, I guess.
Yeah, but today a much broader organisation, and not with an evangelical mission at all, but more of a service provision.
One of the service providers. And in terms of, I mean, I think, people, when they think about Scandinavia, who are not Scandinavian, think about economies and social policies that are very much defined by a high regard for social protection.
Am I here to shatter the myth?
Yeah, exactly. Have we got rose-tinted glasses on this one?
I mean, so certainly there is a sort of basic level of protection that, you know, most people would consider to be of quite high standard. But I also think it's interesting to see, for example, Sweden is one of the countries in the OECD where inequality has grown the most in the last 10 years.
Wow, is that right?
So
Wow.
the kind of gap, if you want, between people with resources and access to resources and people without has very much grown over the last 10 years. And so there, even though I know I sometimes, you know, when I compare to London and the homelessness issue there, which is obviously rampant, you know, you'd look at Stockholm or you'd look at Sweden and say it's not as bad, but there are still 3,000 to 4,000 people who are homeless in Stockholm.
And are there enough shelters for people who find themselves homeless in this sort of environment?
Yeah, there are shelters, but I think a lot of, and there is even in Stockholm, there's even a sort of shelter guarantee. So if you ask for a place in a shelter before midnight, you're guaranteed a place, which is obviously very good. But I think also speaking from an Amnesty International perspective, shelter isn't enough. Housing is a human right, and so therefore to kind of say that the bar is just to access shelter or just to have access to day-to-day provision isn't enough, but to actually say people have to have sustainable housing, have to have affordable housing, and not just resolve the situation from day to day or from night to night. So I think that's one of the things that we were working on then, and Amnesty Sweden is certainly working on it now to ensure that becomes a priority.
I love this idea about, you know, where are you setting the bar for your response, and I think that speaks very powerfully about a perspective that has been formed by a higher bar around social protection. But thank you for segueing into Amnesty's work, because you're currently the interim director for Sweden of Amnesty International. So could you just, you know, give us a little bit of an elaboration about what Amnesty sets itself to be doing?
Well, I think the starting point many years ago, obviously, the organization is celebrating its birthday this year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But when we set out, and it started obviously by Peter Benson in the UK, and his ad, he took out a full page ad in a paper where he kind of lifted up and showcased people who are imprisoned for their political views and how wrong that was, and that's how the organization was born. So obviously the starting point back then was very much around civil and political rights, the right to dissent, the right to freedom of expression, the right to protest, peaceful protest, the right to, you know, association, all those kind of quite classic political and civil and political rights. And then over time, both as the organization has grown and established itself in more places around the world, today we're not just in the UK or in Western Europe, we're in 70 places around the world, you know, and on every continent. We also realized the need to broaden that scope and not just talk about civil and political rights, because in order to uphold or to demand your civil and political rights, you also have economic needs, social needs, cultural needs. Okay. So the scope of the organization has certainly broadened, and today we talk about all the human rights that are enshrined in the Declaration of Human Rights. So we would speak about freedom of expression and right to protest as much as we would speak about the right to housing or the right to education or the right to.
Okay, so you've expanded to incorporate being champions for the Human Rights Convention.
Yeah. But also, I think what's interesting about us as an organization, I think, is that we combine the knowledge about the human rights framework and in depth research about what actually goes on the ground. So when we speak about things, we talk about what is happening right now in Russia or what's happening right now in Syria. So, but we're also obviously a grassroots organization. So over the world, there's 7 million members. There's about 10 million supporters. So the fact that lots of us are kind of joining up and linking arms in order to protect and uphold everyone's rights, I think is also very powerful. So even though we're part of us is an expert organization and a research organization, we're also very much an activist and grassroots organization.
I mean, those numbers are probably equivalent to the population of Sweden plus a little bit of the top end of Norway, right?
Yeah.
So you're like 10 a Scandinavian state.
Yeah, no, and I think, I mean, in Sweden we're about close to 90,000 members, and that's also quite humbling to say that we're part of the human rights movement in the world.
Yes.
I think our former international Secretary General actually said that he thought that Amnesty was one of the world's greatest natural resources, and I thought that was very well put. The idea that people standing in solidarity with one another, without any gain for themselves, in saying that you on the other side of the world, I'm going to stand up for your human rights as well as for my own, and that's something very precious.
It's very precious, to be pro-social.
Yeah.
I like that expression, and thank you. In terms of where Amnesty sees some of the hotspots currently, in terms of the erosion of human rights and people being put into prison without proper due process because of their political and civil rights perspectives, where's Amnesty saying some of those hotspots are at the moment?
Well, there's quite a lot of them, aren't there? which is troubling in lots of ways. I mean, I think what we're seeing on the one hand is kind of more and sustained threats to the international system of human rights, and it's also being led by some quite powerful countries. I mean, the US over the last 4 years, Russia for certain, China as well. So, which includes that safeguards are being eroded, and countries are also actively seeking to undermine safeguards and human rights framework. And also in Europe, thinking of Hungary, for example, or Poland, where the independence of the judiciary and the independence of an independent media, so to speak, are also being eroded. So I think there's lots of places around the world where that is actually happening. I mean,
and all members. I mean, those top three are, all three of them are members of the International Security Council.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which has its own concerns, actually, when you reflect on that.
And I also think when those countries are then setting the mark, as it were, instead of saying that these, to a certain extent, I sometimes wonder whether the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, whether that would have been enshrined today. I don't think we could have formed it, possibly, because it seems like the divide is too great. But
well, we were coming out of a global war, and the voices that might have been raised beforehand to say no, were actually not in a place to raise up at that point.
No.
So I think it was a sort of opportunistic, felicitous point in history. One might even say it was sort of Kairos time, that there was an opportunity for this to be announced. Of course, we now have to work out the elaboration of it, and I guess that's part of the role of what Peter thought he was doing in creating and announcing through an advert. We need to raise up the voice for those who have been made voiceless, right?
Absolutely.
Are there any thoughts you have about? I mean, I think people, just looking through their media news, however they digest it, would be very exercised at the moment around what's going on in Myanmar, for instance, or indeed in the last few days, contested story that's come out around the rule of Dubai's daughter and her removal of her human rights.
Yeah.
On those 2 or 3 issues, and we might want to bring in the whole appalling account of what's been going on over the last years in Syria, for instance.
Yeah.
On those sort of 3 areas, have you got some thoughts about that? Not asking you for policy, Anna.
No,
no. A sort of Amnesty sort of reflection on that.
Well, I think in Myanmar, if we want to start there, I think that the military coup and then the subsequent arrest of both the state chancellor and other elected leaders, that was early February, wasn't it? Which triggered mass protests across the country. I think you could see both sides. I think previous crackdowns of human rights in Myanmar have seen large-scale protests, and it is, I don't know whether it's inappropriate to say, it's sometimes hopeful to see that people aren't disheartened, and particularly young people are still.
It's extraordinary, especially
protesting.
When you see the level of violence that could be enacted.
Absolutely, and that particularly young people are protesting peacefully and are very much, clear that this isn't, that this is a breach. But
it's not the world that they want to be living in. That's the point, isn't it? I don't think they so much see it as a breach of their human rights. It's more, what sort of world do they want to be part of?
Yeah. But at the same time, it's obviously a very ominous point, a tipping point, as it were, for people in Myanmar. What will happen next? Will there be large-scale violence? Will there be extrajudicial killings? Will there be, even further crackdowns by security forces? And I think that, that situation threatens to further worsen the military repression and impunity that exists in terms of
practically, what does Amnesty International do? Because you're there in over 70 countries.
Yeah.
Globally, you have around about 7 million members. Okay, so what
do we do?
What happens then?
Yeah,
we'll be sitting here going, not very happy with that.
No.
Practically, what then happens?
What do we do? Well, I think what we're doing now is speaking closely to people on the ground. So some of our partner organizations, some of the people who are, on the ground to actually monitor what is actually happening and very quickly speak to the rest of the world in terms of what's happening. I think sometimes,
especially when actually, we've now lost for a second time, web access into Myanmar.
Yeah, so I think sometimes one of our primary roles in a situation like that is to amplify other voices and to kind of be a platform for that information. Of course, we have to verify it, we have to, make sure there's valid information, but to sort of spread it. So that's something that we would do.
Yeah.
And if a situation was developing more gradually, we might even be there ourselves in terms of doing research, speaking to witnesses,
right.
Interviewing victims, cataloging what's, violence against innocence or whatever. But the other thing that we would do is, because we have a strong presence in these 70 countries, we would also then immediately start pressure the international community to pressure Myanmar in turn. So I would speak to my Secretary of State or my Minister for Foreign Affairs.
In each nation,
yes,
then these conversations taking place with government officials.
Yeah, so speak to government officials, speaks to Member of Parliament and say, this is what we think you should be doing. We should be pressurizing this. We should be looking into freezing funds, for example, for certain military individuals. We should be, each amnesty would then pressure its own Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Their own national architecture.
Yes, but in a coordinated way with similar messages and similar statements. And then also lobby, of course, the international community in terms of the UN bodies.
Yes, for them to step up.
for them to step
it's
up.
almost a support network, isn't
Yeah,
it? You know,
yeah.
to say you're not just isolated there in Manhattan or Geneva, but you've actually got people on the ground here, 7 million of us, you know, who will not change who's in power in the UN, but we will be there to support you on these areas.
And also hold you accountable if we need to, and
Yeah.
sort of say it's time for the international community to speak out about this issue. It's time for a resolution. It's time for this and that.
Yeah.
I think normally,
and also Anna, you need to be the work you do with the media, which was one of your roles. What happens in regards to the media?
Yeah, so then also we would then, and I think this is again part of this amplifying information and being a platform for information. So of course we would then also, you know, work quite closely with the people on the ground and our colleagues to make sure that the media in the West don't forget about the issue, that they're reporting about the issue, that they're reporting correctly about the issue, and comment on those reports and the recommendations that we put through. And then lastly, and this might not have very much effect in this particular case, because I don't know how sensitive the military leaders are to kind of international outcry or pressure. But in some cases, what we do is we encourage individuals such as you and I to write directly to members. So we would maybe issue a statement or an alert to say, please, here's a text you could use, here's a address we could reach this particular individual, and please express your concern about the situation and the way that it's developing and escalating. At the moment, I don't think we're doing that because we don't believe that will have very much impact, but this is something that we do and that we also see has a result, but particularly when we're talking about individuals who are being held, imprisoned, tortured, you know, are on death row, etc.
And you also have an elaboration that you write letters to the individuals who have had their habeas corpus rights removed, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So that's something else that we do, and sometimes we write to their family members as well to express solidarity and to say that we are thinking of them, and so
that's wonderful. I didn't know about that aspect.
Yeah, and it's very heartwarming, the messages that we sometimes get back from people who are released, who are saying that, you know, when I was isolated, when I, you know, didn't have the right to have visits from my lawyer, or when my family couldn't visit, I still had access to these letters, and not just occasional letters. There would be thousands, tens of thousands of letters from around the world of people saying, we're thinking of you, keep strong, we're fighting for you, we haven't forgotten you.
Yeah, that has an extraordinary impact on the psyche, to sense that others have not forgotten you. No. You may be being put out of society, silenced, but actually the power of connection is there, elaborated through letters.
But I think it's often those combinations of those various tactics, the kind of media work, the lobby work that goes behind the scenes, the kind of public outcry, if you want, the letter writing campaigns, or the sort of mass campaigns. It's often the combination of those different tactics that have an effect in the end. But of course, for each case and each country and each situation, you have to think differently. What will work in this particular case? Will people be sensitive to others calling them out, holding them accountable, or will they not be? And should we work in different ways then?
I mean, with some of the conversations I've been having with people, I've always, the guests I always ask, you know, in terms of a sort of spiritual elaboration of this, you know, one thing that comes to my mind immediately, Anna, and I'm sure you'll, you know, come back to me on this if you don't know it already, is where the call goes out into religious fora who may well be moved to both write, but they will also be moved to invest in some time for prayer for those who you are nominating as arenas for prayer. Is that a stream of work that you have actually stitched into the fabric of Amnesty's work, or is that a problematic arena?
Well, I think for Amnesty as a whole, as an organization, it's important that we are and are seen to be both kind of neutral and independent, so that we're not affiliated to any religion, or we're non-confessional, we're non-religious in our outtake, and also we're not affiliated to any political party. And it's important that we do that so that we're able to speak out regardless of whether that country or that situation, that individual, regardless of their political views, their religious beliefs or belongings, so that kind of independence and partiality is very important to us. But I'm sure, and I think as starting out, there was a kind of very strong Judeo-Christian roots in terms of how Amnesty was framed and started out, and the way the work was developed. And I'm sure today there are lots of members individually who will hold strong beliefs and also will carry out their activism the way that they see
where it lands.
But as an organization, we wouldn't necessarily.
You haven't got that amplification channel yet. At the beginning, we were talking about what keeps you going as somebody working first of all in the arena of sexual exploitation and the extreme cruelties that can occur within human trafficking, and then the work with homelessness, with the city mission, the elderly, the lonely, those who are deprived of accessing social protection at a level that you would deem as a sustainable and ongoing good place to be, quality of life. And now in Amnesty International, and we see so many things that are just depressing and frankly traumatic. What do you draw on? Where would you like to go with your own personal journey of keeping yourself in a good place, in a place which has some hope immersed in it?
Yeah, well, I think for me it is that sense of being able to contribute to something that is meaningful, that is larger than me, is kind of my driving force. I think I would be much more in trouble if I was doing a job where I didn't have that sense of, I might not own the solution on my own, but I am contributing. I'm doing my best. I'm being part of something greater. So I think that is in itself the driving force. And I think even though there's a balance, even though I've seen a lot of situations where all hope feels lost, or it feels, the situation is very bleak, or you can feel that responsibility is very heavy in terms of where do we go from now? What's the next step? What do we do now? I also think the other side of that coin, in a sense, is also hope. Is kind of seeing that, those small steps, that one letter, that one phone call, that meeting actually does contribute and does change things. And so I think there's a balance in seeing that they go together. But having said that, I think it is important to always, think about how am I sustainable in my work? How do I recharge my batteries? How do I, what do I need in order to be able to go on?
You were commenting about existential health.
Yes,
at the top end when we just connected.
Started, yeah.
I wonder, could you just elaborate what you mean by existential health, and then perhaps leave us with some existential health.
No, but I think it's very interesting. The World Health Organization have done some work on this, whereby they've looked at people who are objectively healthy, who subjectively feel a lot worse, and people who are objectively not healthy, but actually feel a lot better. And they wondered about how is it that someone with a very bad health condition, or a terminal illness, or some chronic illness,
or even suboptimal conditions,
might value their life more, might feel more connected with other people than other people who, objectively speaking, have not got
are
as
in the
much.
top 20% of the world's population. Yeah,
they identified a number of sort of connecting things that those people who objectively felt healthier, regardless of their actual condition in physical terms, and they framed this, or they call this, existential health. And they've said that some of those things are what gives people the ability to thrive and have a positive outlook of life, no matter what their actual circumstances are. And so there are a number of those. They've named all these different characteristics, but and I don't know them all off the top of my head, but hope is one. The sense of hope that things will get better, or that we can contribute to things getting better. The other thing is a sense of belonging, a sense of community, a sense of being part of a network, or having a community where I fit in and I can belong. Another is a sense of wonder and awe, being able to wonder at your own situation, at your friendships, at love in your life, or the things that you value.
Song that we've all been hearing exactly. During lockdown.
Well, not that whole idea of thinking about there are things that are important. Existential health, in terms of,
and one might term that not only mental health. We've been hearing a lot about mental health, but actually, we fought shy of naming it as spiritual health. The spiritual dimension being that which actually connects us with others.
Yeah.
No matter what the political creed, no matter what the economic condition. I mean, of course, all these different levels are deeply important in terms of inequality and injustice. And we cannot be truly happy in an unjust world. We simply cannot. Not once we've made that connection that we are connected, right? But I think, one of the things that has come out a lot in the interviews and in the contributions we've had on the One Boat over this last COVID year is this theme that keeps coming through of the importance of having some sort of spiritual resilience in the midst of what has come as a global series of crises in the shape of COVID, and landed in very different ways across the nations.
Absolutely. And I think Amnesty would frame it differently. Wouldn't necessarily talk about existential health, but we talk about core values, and one of our core values is solidarity.
Exactly.
International solidarity, and the idea that human rights are universal and indivisible. You can't. Every person has the same value and the same rights. So I think that's a different way of expressing that kind of that interconnectedness that you're talking about.
Absolutely, and which is why I invited you today to come and have a seat on the boat and bring Amnesty's important voice onto the boat as we row on through this COVID pandemic, which is having so many horrific impacts, also new insights being made available to us, and we need to grasp those.
Absolutely.
And thank you so much, and our warmest good wishes to all your fellow workers in Sweden, and the elaboration of Amnesty's work globally. Thank you so much.
Thank you.